we'll have some tickets to give away again later this morning. When you go to the fair, are you looking mainly at the plants and things of that nature, or are you going to go see the pigs and the cows?
Well, I have a little grandson, so we got to look at it all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Of course.
yeah. But I do gravitate towards the plants more than the animals.
Yeah. Well,
got to look at them, too.
Yeah, you go look at the pigs, but they're usually in the form of sausage in a bun.
Well, yeah, you imagine the the cuts of beef. Well, let's see how many.
Looks like that was a
How many
good cow.
steaks we going to get out of that?
But the fair is a wonderful time, and the community fairs are coming up, and,
Yes.
and folks put a lot of energy into those things, and a lot of it has to do with their canning and their growing of produce and everything. They're justifiably proud of it, so we wonder about things of that nature, garden variety things, and we check in with you from time to time on drought and on blight. What's the blight picture looking like these days? I imagine it's pretty good.
It's still, we're still okay regarding late blight. Downy mildew's another one that it really attacks a lot of the cucurbit crops, or the pickles, cucumbers. That's been spotted all around, various states around us, west of us, north of us, east of us, and even in Pennsylvania. And that'll cause those plants to decline pretty readily. It's kind of a similar thing to late blight on tomatoes, just on those other crops.
Mm-hmm. There's a feeling, and I don't know that science backs it up, but it seems to work, that some of the worst storms don't make it into our area because we're so surrounded by hills, and we're sort of in a bit of a valley, and they bump up against the hills and they can't get in. Once one does, it bounces off all sides of the hills and keeps coming back at us. But if we can keep them out, then that's good. Does it work that way with blight and things that are airborne like that too?
Yeah, just as the wind patterns go, which they can go all kind of different directions with our hills and valleys, and they can get in one side, and then however that air current moves it, those spores will move. And of course, we can't see those spores moving through the air. So we really don't, we see the wind, we see the trees, the leaves moving. We know it's there, we can feel it, but we can't see those airborne particles, those spores that are there being moved around. And of course, I'm sure millions of them land on something that is not susceptible to attack from, like late blight is fairly specific to potatoes and tomatoes. And so when it lands on a maple leaf, it doesn't do anything. So that's happening all the time too.
No.
It just has to find those susceptible plants and be able to get an entry point and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Wanted to ask you about roses and use our rose bushes as a talking point here. In the spring, of course, every year I cut them way back. I end up with about 8 to 10 inch shoots, 5 or 6 of them coming off the one rose bush. And then this summer, of course, they bloomed out, and I've got a huge bushy rose bush that was absolutely covered in gorgeous roses. It looked wonderful. How do I phrase this? Do I trim those back? Do I do that during the growing season to encourage a second growth, or is it just going to come on by itself? Do roses work that way?
Some of those are variety dependent because there's a number of different types of roses. Mm-hmm. So some will, rebloom and others won't. They'll develop those flower buds.
One shot.
And you've got one shot at it. Now you might get another shoot come out that'll get another flower on it. Mm-hmm. And then if your plant gets too thick or too dense, then you might want to do a little bit of pruning there to open it up, thin it out a little bit, because those heading cuts, when you cut it off a foot above the ground each year, that's what happens. You get a lot of growth that comes out of there. And when you continue to do that, in some things you can pinch, and that might just get new vegetative growth or new stems coming and not get any blooms on there. And then on other plants that are able to do that, they'll might get new growth, and then on that new growth develop flower buds, and then get flowers on.
Problem with roses is when you pinch them, they pinch back.
Yeah, yes, you have to be wearing the right attire and gloves and get in there and do that.
Well, I wondered about that. When I do trim them back in the spring, I take some of those dead ones, those shoots. I take all of the dead ones that I can find, but I do thin them out, so I only end up with 6 or 8 of maybe 8 or 10 inch main stems, and that's where all of this growth comes from.
Yeah.
They did really, really well. They look great this year, and I noticed that after those roses were gone a month or so ago, now I have some roses coming back again. So I was wondering if that was
and it might be on
byproduct,
and it might have been on newer growth. So that's the other thing that can vary between types of plants is what age of wood do the flower buds develop on. So on the rose example, those flower buds are developing on that 1-year-old, it's not even 1-year-old wood.
Yeah.
All right. So that new growth that came up this year developed not only new growth, but then flower buds and flowers on that plant. Mm-hmm. There's other plants that you can snip that, trim it, and it may not flower till literally on wood that's 2-year-old. Mm-hmm. So an apple tree would be an example of that. That first year you'll just get vegetative growth, and then that overwinters, in the fall of this growing season, that new growth will develop flower buds for next year. Mm-hmm. So that there's just a lot of, we need to look at the individual plant.
Factors.
Yeah, we need to look at the individual plant and its habits and how it functions. Because if let's say we pruned that apple tree in the fall, we're removing a whole bunch of flower buds that are being set up for the following year, when you could get flowers and then possibly fruit after that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So roses are pretty well independent. They make up their own minds what they're going to do.
Yeah, and you have those. You have the bushy types. You have trailing types and vining types, and the tea roses, and there's a whole bunch of different.
It's a big family.
Types of them, and a lot of variation in hardiness, and that's the other thing that can affect that is not only pruning, but weather conditions can kill off those buds too. So a lot of times we have to prune them back, in another climate that's a little less severe in the winter, more temperate. Those shoots will overwinter, and so you can get a larger plant with more blooms on because that wood didn't die back. And in our case here, a lot of times we have to prune those back because those stems will die in the winter anyway. It gets cold enough for long enough to kill off that wood.
I want to go back out into the garden and ask about onions and lifting onions. When is the proper time to do that? And how can we make those onions last longer if we're trying to keep them over the winter? Because it seems like they go bad fast.
Yeah. The type of onion, so if you have a sweet Spanish onion, those aren't really meant to store as long as some of the other types of onions. There's other long day, short day, and medium day onions that are storage onions. So they're going to develop a harder outer layers, and there's less moisture content in them, and so those are the ones we typically see all year around in the store. And then more seasonal are the sweet Spanish types, which tend to be, of course, less pungent from a taste perspective, a little sweeter. They also have more moisture in them, and so they don't last as long or store as long. So selecting, if you want to store long-term, like all winter long, then we've got to pick the varieties that are really better equipped to do that. And then we've got to provide the right storage conditions.
Yeah, you want cool, dark.
Because otherwise they'll start to sprout. And then, of course, in that sprouting process. They're trying to grow. The bulb's trying to grow, and it uses the energy in the bulb that we wanted to utilize to grow a new plant.
Do people
So
can onions at all or freeze them? I wouldn't think that would work. Canning and freezing onions.
Freezing would be, I think they would come out as mush.
Yeah.
In that freezing process.
Yeah.
But I think you can those. You can make pickled onions and
Oh, okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, in fact, my wife's made some of those recently. They're pretty
They're pretty
tasty,
good?
you know. Yeah, you put some of those on a burger. Or,
Like
they're
those?
very, excuse me. They're very good.
Yeah. Well, terrific.
Yeah. So that
I
yeah.
know
So
that
those,
she hasn't made me any cookies in a long time. Just say it.
you'll have to keep on her about that. Yeah. So we're kind of moving into that. Some of those storage.
Yeah, it's
some
going to
of
be well, it is. It's the middle of canning season.
Right. So
now.
if you're growing some of those vine crops that you store those crops, potatoes are another one. You know, some of the squashes that have the harder rinds that'll store for a while. So all those things, you know, people are starting to harvest those now, and
we'll be doing more spaghetti sauce this
yeah. So
weekend.
those are things that can extend, you know, help last, provide a food source for a while.
Yeah, out in the canning cupboard. Yeah, good stuff. All right, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
He's
you.
Bob Pollock, Extension Service, 465-3880 if you have a question, and otherwise you can just let us know and we'll pass it along. Answer it right here on the radio station. It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com.